كويس. تمام. Thank you very much. Okay. Welcome again for the 12th International Translation Conference, Translation and Creativity and Interdisciplinary Encounter 2023. Now we are going to start panel 3, New Trends in Transcreativity and Transmediality, Translation as Mediation, led by me, Dr. Mahmoud الحرثاني. أهلا وسهلا. Welcome all. We have 3 papers, and the most interesting things about these papers four papers, sorry, thank you Ghanima, that they are actually creatively made and homemade. They are delivered by our students, and this is a good sign about the TII, about the students as well, who are going to continue their studies hopefully, and some of them are already on PhD programs, as we are going to introduce. We have 4 speakers today: Yasmin Al-Ali, Yasmin Mshairiyya, Arrim Al-Adba, and Malak Al-Atrus. Welcome. The titles of their papers: Adapting Western Picture Books into the Arabic Culture, Finnish Snow Queen and the Qatari Desert Queen by Arrim Al-Adba, with which we are going to start. And then intertitles: The Creative Ancestor of Subtitles by Yasmin Mshairiyya, and then Accessibility Through the Lens of Qatar Museums, Taking Stock by Malak Al-Atrus, and then the last one, Exploring the Phenomenon of Fans Subtitling in the Arab World, The Case of Enemy by Yasmin Al-Ali. I'm going to give the floor for Arrim Al-Adba now to start. Each one of them is going to talk for 15 minutes. And at the end, we are going to start a round of questions and answers and comments as well. Arrim, the floor is yours.
Assalamu alaikum. I would like first to thank all of you for being here today. I consider this an honor for me to have this amazing opportunity to present my paper for all of you today. A short introduction of myself. My name is Arrim Al-Adba. I am currently a PhD student in the College of Humanities and Social Sciences in HBKU, and I also graduated from HBKU specifically from the program of audiovisual translation. So what I'm presenting is an already published paper that is based off of my master's thesis. So it is called Adapting Western Picture Books into the Arabic Culture, and in it I look into my case study, which is adapting the Finnish Snow Queen and making it into the Qatari Desert Queen. But before I delve more into my case study, I would first like to give a very brief introduction about translation, audiovisual translation, specifically on some specific contemporary terms such as transadaptation and transcreation. And then I'm going to talk about how picture books could represent cultures. I'm going to talk about, specifically in my case, how they represent the Qatari culture. And then, I'm sorry, because I can't see the slide, I'm not sure if somebody could help me.
Okay.
So there's something in the slide that I can't really read. But, yeah.
Okay, so you need to duplicate this. Does this work?
It's not working.
It's not working.
But it's fine. I can.
Okay.
Yeah, it's okay. I can make it work. Thank you so much. It's okay.
Sorry.
I'm going to talk about precisely my Qatari culture and how this case study could work in progress and how it can develop in the future, as well as the publications, the current and the future possible publications out of this paper. Is there someone from the IT who can help? Yeah. Because it's not moving. Okay. Okay, now it's done. I'm sorry. Yeah. So, as we all know, translation is the action of transferring certain textual material of one language and replacing it with another textual material from another language. But as we all know, now communication happens with much more than words. We've always interacted with our visual and auditory senses, which contain and add meaning. And the action of transferring that meaning makes it more complex. And here, audiovisual translation comes into place because it doesn't only focus on the verbal transfer, but also the non-verbal transfer from different contexts or cultures into others. And one recurring term in audiovisual translation is transadaptation. It is a merge between two words, translation and adaptation. And here, adaptation from its biological sense means the ability to adapt and to survive and navigate through unknown or uncharted territory. And if we look into some of the famous adaptation examples in biology, from this picture you can see the case of the peppered moths. So there are two types of moths, one that is white with black speckles, while the other one is fully black. And these two moths live in the same environment. But especially in the beginning, the white moths had a better chance at survival than the black ones. Why? Because they camouflaged themselves better against white trees. However, and after the Industrial Revolution, the trees got covered with soot and ash, and they got this dark color. And so here the opposite happened, and black moths now survived better and longer than white moths who were noticed and seen by the predators. And so both of these moths, because of that, they underwent some natural genetic mutation which helped them to adapt and live longer in that kind of environment. So if we take the term transadaptation and try to apply it to literature or translation studies, then it would mean a way of making text survive and continue to exist longer through adapting them and slightly changing them to fit a context or a culture. And according to Gambier, transadaptation is a type of translation that is not a pure word-for-word transfer, rather it's a free translation. And it doesn't only take into consideration the type of text or the multimodal communication, but also more directly the wants and needs of the audience. And it considers more directly their cultures, their values, and their expectations. Another recurring term that is closely intertwined with transadaptation is transcreation. Transcreation, in a nutshell, means that the translator would have more freedom in creating the translated text. And many researchers and translators, especially those within the audiovisual translation field, they believe that any text would be interpreted and viewed differently by people, whom are the audience. And the translator is among that audience. But the translator takes a step further because he takes or she takes the text and they would rewrite it for another type of audience. But during that process of rewriting, the translator would use his or her understanding of the text, which would automatically lead into having differences between the original and the translated text. And because of these differences, the translated text is now considered somewhat of a new text, or at least a new version of the first text. And here's a quote that I think summarized this topic really well. So any retelling of a story is a new story because the text has been interpreted by the reteller. And the reteller of the story in this case is the translator. And here I would like to give some interesting information about how picture book as a multimodal text could do well in promoting, preserving, and representing cultures. A famous example of that is the famously translated picture book, the Kalila wa Dumna. So Kalila wa Dumna was created in 200 BC in Sanskrit and then got translated into Persian and then into Arabic. And mind you, it was translated into Arabic in the 8th century. And because of how interesting the culture and the stories are that are represented in this picture book, it is now translated into more than 50 languages. And because of these translations, it has now more than 200 different versions, which makes it clear how societies now recognize the value and importance behind representing their cultures through picture books in creative manners. And here are some of the modern picture books that combine different cultures together in a creative, interesting manner. So, for example, there's an Indian Rapunzel. There is the traditional clothing that is worn by an African lady who takes her granddaughter to an American school. And there is a story about an Asian girl who is learning to love her racially unique physical features. And similarly to those examples, I am also trying to represent my own culture through an already existing international or a classical story. And the reason behind that is because I noticed that how it could be interesting to find an international classical Western story and see it from a local unique perspective, especially when that perspective is my own culture, from my own settings. And I also noticed that picture books in Qatar and the Arab region in general are catered towards looking and learning at other cultures than the local culture, which is feared to a children's picture book called The Snow Queen and Other Stories. It contains about 11 classical stories told by Hans Christian Andersen. And what I worked on was only the first story, which is called The Snow Queen, and it has the same cover page as the book. My case study is about 17 pages long. So after I trans-adapted and tried to recreate the story into the Qatari context, I needed a way that I can use to talk about my study in a systematic manner. So when I recorded, collected, and categorized my verbal and visual elements that I trans-adapted into my own culture, I wanted to categorize them properly, and for that I used Newmark's cultural categories. Newmark's categories are originally catered for who find difficulty in translating heavy cultural texts. However, looking at these categories, I needed to modify them to make them fit better with my own case study. So here are the modified categories that work well for me. The first one, for example, is the natural environment, which includes all the elements, verbal and visual elements, that has anything directly to do with the weather, geography, and animals, and so on, with the built environment, the characters, the local heritage and culture, and linguistic issues. So after I categorized and finished from organizing my elements into these categories, I went on to analyze them through these translation strategies by Pedersen. So this is the ECR model, which is about translating extra-linguistic cultural references, which I used to analyze the trans-adaptation. Mind you, this model was originally created for subtitling, but I used it for my trans-adapted cultural picture book, which can show how versatile and useful this model can be. So just to give you a glimpse about the visual trans-adaptation first, this is me trying to paint, draw, cut, glue, to try everything that I can do to make the trans-adaptation work and become as Qatari as possible. So here is the original cover page. You can see the Snow Queen, her clothing, the animals, the built environment such as the door behind her, and the natural environment such as the snowflakes and the cold blue hues. And how that turned out was changing the Snow Queen, thank you, changing the Snow Queen into the Desert Queen. And to show you more closely, here is the original, and please pay attention to the proportions, the sizes, and the positions. Even though it changed, but it still retains some of the elements. So the animals got trans-adapted, the clothing changed into what is considered traditionally Qatari, and the door as well became traditional, the sand instead of the snowflakes, and so on. Here's another instance of and this was one of the hardest scenes to trans-adapt. So here you can see the characters such as the Snow Queen and the little boy, the animals, the built environment. So we can see the village and the iced castle as well as the sleigh. They are part of the built environment. And so it got changed into this to make it suit the Qatari context or the Arabic context more generally in this way. Here's an indoor scene. You can see this is inside the king's castle. There's the prince and the princess. The princess is laying down while greeting her guest, which is the girl. And of course, a lot had to be changed in this scene. So it became like this. Of course, you see the bisht. It represents high status. The laying position of the princess changed to make it appropriate for greeting a guest. The bukhur, the chairs, and everything. Here's another one when the girl was on her journey outside. She met an old woman outside her hut, and she got there by riding a reindeer. And so since it's an outside point of view, you can see that the hut changed into a tent, the old lady, her equipment, the horse, the natural environment of the desert, and so on. Here's another one. Also, she met another old woman inside her cottage. There's the teapot. Everything got changed to make the girl meet the old woman inside a tent. You can see from the sadu patterns, the coffee pot, the dress, the everything. Here's the last scene that I'm gonna show. It's a robbery scene where she got kidnapped and kidnapped by the thieves on her way. And here is what it looks like. So you can see how a lot were retained. The type of characters, if they're evil or not, how many are there, even the kind of experience and challenge that the characters face, it's somewhat the same. So that was the visual trans-adaptation. Here is the verbal trans-adaptation, and I'm just going to give you some interesting points. So what I did was use code switching, which is the way of making, of using two varieties of one language in the same text. So here I use the modern standard Arabic for the narration, and then I use the Qatari dialect for direct speech. So whenever the characters spoke, it would be in the Qatari dialect. And that is to tie the verbal text with the visuals in a better way. And you can even see the trans-adaptation in the text itself. So for example, the name of the girl is Gerda, and I changed it into Lulwa, which is a Qatari name that is widely circulated. Also, the reindeer is Hisan or horse, and you can see the Lapland woman, which is the name of place. I wanted to make direct. I wanted to be directly related to Qatar, so I changed Lapland into Al-Wakra. So Al-Wakra, old woman, and so on and so forth. Another issue that I faced was relationships and gender. So in the original, the boy and the girl are friends who love each other, and in this visual instance, they have this type of affection towards each other. And of course, I couldn't retain that in the Qatari context because it would seem strange and would not be accepted by the society. So what I wanted to do is retain the images as much as possible while making sense of them in the verbal text. And by that, I made them from friends into siblings. Another instance was using religion-specific phrases. I'm sorry, خلاص, بس this one.
So interesting.
I'm sorry.
We are getting
just this one, okay. The religion-specific phrases, because we use them in our dialect so often, I also used it in this instance when the characters expressed sympathy. For example, you poor child became ya haram, Allah يعينك inshallah. Okay, so here's the analysis. I'm going to skip into the main analysis, the verbal and the visual transadaptation. So even though it were only 17 pages, the total amount of changes that happened were about 410 elements. And you can see here that about 80% of the whole story got substituted, got replaced from a Western context into the Arabic Qatari context. And here Pedersen says the strategy of cultural substitution, which constitutes 80% of the book or the story, is considered the most domesticating strategy to use. And that's what I used as a justification for my study, that I did successfully domesticate about 80% of the story. So this study is work in progress. As a PhD student, I intend on continuing this project by working on the rest of the book. The book is about more than 200 pages, and as I said, I only worked on 17 pages. So we can imagine how the other stories could pose other cultural, linguistic, and visual challenges to transadapt. I'm also looking for searching for a new theoretical model that could work better for my transadaptation, and I wanted to be more specific for transadapting picture books in specific. Also, this study could look more into the needs and wants of the Qataris and non-Qataris that live in Qatar regarding the representation of the Qatari culture through this type of creative translation. Okay. Publication outputs, not a sentence, I'm sorry. So there's the research output, which is this study, and there's the product output, which I collaborated with HBKU Press to publish this transadaptation, The Desert Queen, and hopefully other stories. And I thank them so much for their encouragement. These are my references. Thank you so much, and I apologize for taking too long. Thank you so much.
Yasmin studied her master's degree in the department as well, and she did her MA thesis on literary translation. Now Yasmin is a PhD student in modern languages at the University of Southampton. Ahlan Yasmin, the floor is yours. Go on.
Thank you. Okay, hello everyone, thank you for having me. Thank you Dr. Mahmoud for the introduction. Today we are going to take a little trip back in time and explore creativity in intertitles, which I call the ancestor of subtitles. First things first, what are intertitles? So they are cards inserted into the strip of a silent film to add information and dialogues, like the one that you are seeing here. This is how they used to relay dialogues at the time of silent film era. There are different names for these. One of them is title cards, because they are literally title cards inserted into the strip of a film after the production. Back in the day, during the silent film era, they used to be called titles and subtitles. Titles are the ones that come at the beginning with the title of the movie, and subtitles are the ones that come in between the scenes. However, with the advent of sound film and modern subtitles, there was a confusion between modern subtitles, which come at the bottom of a screen that we know today, and these older subtitles. So the film industry came up with this new term for the older model, which is intertitles. And this is also the term adapted by academia as well. Now, there are mainly two types. Expository intertitles, they show the titles of the movie, of the scenes, and the narration. And there are dialogue intertitles, which show characters' speech and which were found to be more popular among audiences. And sometimes it can be a mix of both. So now we are going to explore the visual creativity in intertitles. First of all, we need to point out that back in the day, it was really an appreciated art. They used also to be called decorative titles or art titles. What you see here is one page of a magazine. In fact, the article was several pages. And the magazine article is appreciating decorative titles in the movie called The Submarine Eye. Also, in 1929, there was even an Oscars category for intertitles, which was called Best Title Writing, and which was won by Joseph Farnham, that you can see on the left here, receiving his Oscar prize. Now, let's take some concrete examples of visual creativity. Here we have creativity in font and mood. We have the one of Santa Claus, and it's the oldest intertitle which I could find. It dates back to 1898, and already there was a lot of creativity, as you can see, with the font, but also with the little snow effect which is added and which relate to the content of the film. The other one is from the Cabinet of Dr. Caligari, which is, you know, a bit of a crazy psychedelic mystery movie, and I think the font and the decoration also reflects very well the mood of the movie. Now, there is more advanced visual art, like here in The Forbidden Fruit, and this is very sophisticated. We have a representation of the hand of Eve and the hand of Adam reaching towards the forbidden fruit, and there is the snake in between who is, you know, causing all the trouble. The producers of this movie said that the hardest part in this was to actually create the nuances in colors in this intertitle. Remember, that was a long time ago during the black and white era, and it was a very huge technical difficulty to create these nuances of colors. We also have a mix, you know, of image inside the intertitle, like the movie The Shake here. And they also added this yellow hue to recreate the atmosphere of a desert. And the funny thing is that even today in Hollywood movies, you will notice that when they show you like a scene like in Mexico or in any hot place, they like to add that yellow filter to show you that it's a hot place. So that was like a very old technique, actually. We also have movement in intertitles. They are not all fixed, they move, and they move based on the content of the scene to create some sort of harmony. So here, let's look at how this one moves. I hope it's gonna move. There you go. So the text moves based on the content of the scene. Now, text on film back in the day was also a huge technical difficulty. That's why they used intertitles. But there were very rare exceptions where you can see text on film, like modern subtitles. This one is from Just Neighbors in 1919. It's a very rare example, and this is a parrot which says liar to a woman, and the text appears and disappears from the screen while the film keeps going. So this is very rare occurrence back in the day, as you can see. We also have what I would call probably the most creative type of content in intertitles, which was called verbal texting. It's a mix of the film. So look at the two sides of these two people. It's a couple, and they are talking. And while they are talking on the phone, their words move from one side to another, and they move based on the way they talk and the way they express themselves and the emotions. So the movement of the text is supposed to show you how they are talking. Remember, it's a silent film, people cannot hear. So that was a way to relay not just the words, but also the mood, the intonation, the feelings. So I'm gonna show you what it's gonna look like. I'm going also to read the text for you because it moves very fast, just to make sure you get it. Hopefully the video is gonna work. Hello? Is that you, Jack? Yes, darling? Don't darling me. Who was that girl you were with in the park today? Why? Why, that was my sister. You never told me you had a sister. Surely you did not. You will have to show me. I will come right over to see her. So yeah, Jack is in trouble. So my favorite thing here is when he is about to tell her, I surely did, but then she cuts him off before he finishes and she says, you didn't. And look how the phrase you didn't hits his words and all the letters shatter. It really shows you how she cuts him off and the intensity of the utterance as well. So I think this is really such a creative thing, and that was in 1907. That was really a technical achievement. Now, there was also intertitles in cartoons, not only in movies, like in Mickey Mouse that you can see here. We also have cartoons in intertitles which are used for a film, not for a cartoon like this one. And this is supposed to represent a man who is very drunk and who is looking at a police officer coming towards him. And look how everything is very wobbly. You know, the cartoon and even the utterance, it really shows his state of mind at that moment. Now, another very, very interesting concept was dialogue balloons. And that was an attempt at adding text on film, which, as I said before, it was very difficult. And looking at this, you would think that that was done post-production, but that is not the case. What was done here is that they take a huge clear glass, they stick the dialogue balloon on it, and they put it in front, they hold it in front of the actors, and they film the scene while holding it. And the funny thing is that sometimes when the actors are a little bit too close to the glass, the dialogue balloon would cast a shade on the actor. As you can see here, there is a shade on his coat from the dialogue balloon. It seems a little bit silly, but that was really one of the milestones towards what we know today as modern subtitling. So intertitles were also used as trademark markers because, you know, movie piracy was also a problem even back then. In this example in the corners, if you can see, it says Thomas Edison trademark. And yes, it's the same Thomas Edison that we know as the light bulb inventor. He produced a lot of silent movies back in the day who were very successful. So I'm surprised he's not more known for that. But yeah, it was very important to show the trademark in intertitles. This next example is by the French production company called Pathé. Their trademark is the rooster, but more importantly, it is the bright red color. Back in the day, that was in 1903, they were the only production company who had the technology that allows them to add this type of red color into the intertitles. They were the only ones, and they never revealed the secret how to do that. And they would tell their viewers, if you want to know if this is an original movie or if it's a copy, just look at the color of the intertitles. If it's bright red, it's genuine, it's ours. If it's not, then it's fake, it's a fake copy. And then, of course, we have the iconic lion from Metro-Goldwyn-Mayer, which is still used to this day. It's a very famous trademark. Now, let's look at the translation of intertitles, and this is also a very interesting thing in terms of creativity. So here you have a movie called The Blind Man, which was a Spanish silent movie. The one on the left is the original title. I'm sorry for the quality, that was the best quality I could find. And as you can see, it's very simple, very basic. However, in its French translation, as you can see, they allowed themselves more visual liberties. They changed the font, they added a picture of a character, they also added a bit of a brown hue to it. And this is something that we cannot really do with subtitling today. We cannot really have that much creative liberty in translating. However, intertitles, they allow you to really get creative in the translated version, as you can see. Now, yes, so we have seen creativity in the visual term. Let's see creativity in the content, what's inside. So first of all, they were creative in the content in general. Here, for example, we have an intertitle that has multiple uses. It has the number of the scene, the title, Vision of Christmas Present. We have a narration, which is Bob Cratchit and Fred Drink. And then we have dialogue to Mr. Scrooge. And I noticed that they use capital letters when they want to show that people are shouting or speaking loudly. And here they are cheering to Mr. Scrooge. We also have the language, the style. They allow themselves to be, very sophisticated in the style. Here it says the Wall Street, the palatial parking place of the bull and the bear, mostly the bull. So this is a reference to an actual statue of a bull and a bear that exists in Wall Street. However, when they say mostly the bull, it's like a metaphor that refers to how harsh and competitive Wall Street can be. And I really appreciate the language here. We also have the use of scripture in intertitles. Usually it's verses from the Bible, such as this one, mostly used in religious films or when the characters are a bit religious. We also have the use of poetry, whether poetry as it is or an adaptation of poetry. In this example, they have taken a poem called The Three Fishers by Charles Kingsley, and they changed a few things in the poem to make them fit the plot of the movie, and then they used it here as an intertitle to reflect what's in the movie. Also, intertitles, they can make animals speak, such as this Soviet movie called Arsenal. And here we have, it's a war movie, by the way, and here we have these horses which speak to the riders, and here they are telling them, we are Russian in our 24 legs. And there are other examples of horses reciting war songs and folk songs, so that was very interesting.
Last sentence.
Okay, so we have also bilingual intertitles. Here we have examples of Chinese and English. We also have an example of Arabic and French from a movie called Barsoum Looking for a Job, which is the oldest Egyptian movie ever produced. And then we also have censorship in intertitles. They allowed a great deal of censorship, whether through manipulation or omission. The reasons were usually either religious or political. For example, under Nazi Germany, they would censor ideas related to communism and Bolshevism. In the US, they censor anything related to capitalism. I think that's going to be the last thing I'm going to mention. They would also use live orators with intertitles, where when they project the movie, they would have a live orators like that one. He would translate the intertitles. He would also add any commentary and explanation of cultural references, which are a bit ambiguous maybe for the audience. They were also very important for accessibility for illiterate viewers, because not everyone can read the content of the intertitles. And they would also censor things sometimes if they are a bit too explicit. So this is the end. So intertitles first ended in terms of art because movie makers considered that the art is a little bit too distracting. At some point, they completely stopped with the advent of sound film and modern subtitling. So yeah, all good things come to an end. I hope this was interesting for you. Thank you so much, everyone. Thank you.
Usually people travel in future, we travel back in history now. And I think, yeah, this is really interesting. Thank you, Yasmin. Now, with Malak Al-Atrous, Accessibility Through the Lens of Qatar Museum. Malak is a strategic consultant, and we are actually moving through different beautiful topics, from transadapting to intertitles and now accessibility, which is a hit of these days. Malak did her MA at our department, TII, in audiovisual translation, and she is doing a PhD in the same department. Luckily, we are having you, Malak. The floor is yours. أهلا وسهلا.
بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته. Good afternoon, everyone. I hope you're all doing well. As Dr. Mahmoud kindly introduced me, my name is Malak Al-Atrous. I am a PR director by day and a PhD student by night. And today I'm going to be presenting my research entitled Accessibility Through the Lens of Qatar Museums Taking Stock. So today we're going to talk about a few key concepts, which are audiovisual translation, accessibility, museums, and visitor experience. We're then going to talk about methodology that was followed for this project, the conceptual framework, and then we're going to get to the practical side of this project, which starts with an audit of the main website of Qatar Museums, and then an audit of the National Museum of Qatar. We're going to talk about the websites briefly, and then we're going to highlight few select areas in the museum itself. We will then conclude with a few thoughts. So as I mentioned, the first key concept for today is audiovisual translation. I know my colleague Arim has already spoke about this, so I'm not going to take too much of your time on this, but we know in audiovisual translation we have key modalities, which are dubbing, subtitling for the deaf and hard of hearing, and audio description. I think it's important to make a note that this project actually goes beyond the principles of accessible audiovisual translation, or the traditional sense of audiovisual translation specifically, because when we think of accessibility in audiovisual translation, we often think of disability. As I just mentioned, the modalities are subtitling for the deaf and hard of hearing and audio description, which is very interesting because these two services are really valuable and helpful for everyone, regardless of their abilities. So this project really looks at creative audiovisual translation and creative access. In terms of creative audiovisual translation, it's basically the media localization and adaptation practices that provide linguistic and cultural access to media, and also include a lot of creativity, as their name suggests. And then when we look at creative access from a museology perspective, it's basically concerned with making a curatorial model of an art exhibition accessible, of course, through different services such as audio description or sign language, and also engaging with the artists that use this specific method in their art practice. So we've been talking about museums. I've mentioned Qatar Museums and the National Museum of Qatar, but what are museums really? So last year, a new definition was proposed, and it's basically a museum is a not-for-profit permanent institution in the service of society that researches, collects, conserves, interprets, and exhibits tangible and intangible heritage. It's open to the public, accessible, and inclusive. Museums foster diversity and sustainability. They operate and communicate ethically, professionally, with the participation of communities, offering varied experiences for education, enjoyment, reflection, knowledge, and knowledge sharing. So as you can see from this definition, we have a lot of keywords that will help frame this project and context moving forward. We basically know now that museums are supposed to be, by definition, accessible. They are supposed to be inclusive, and in the way they operate, they should have, or they should be in conversation with the community for, of course, the benefit of the visitor. So, and basically, a visit should have an experience. When you go to a museum, you're supposed to really experience the museum, the art, the galleries you're in. It shouldn't be really a simple visit. It should be a lot more than that. So what is visitor experience? It's basically a concept that still requires a deeper understanding, but one definition that we can look at is an individual's immediate or ongoing, subjective, and personal response to an activity, setting, or event outside their usual environment. And interestingly enough, within the last few years, museums have been adopting an audience-centered approach, which means that when they're curating or putting together an exhibition or permanent galleries, they put the audience at the center of their approach. And based on observation, when I looked at that, that wasn't really the case when it comes to accessibility, which I'm going to talk about the following slide. And I will get to that in the audit. So what is accessibility? When we look at it from it's basically being able to reach something. But when we look at it from a noun point of view, there are so many definitions, and none of them really have to do with disability. And that's basically the approach that I would like to highlight in this research. For my research questions, I would like to know what are the accessibility, how is accessibility addressed by Qatar Museums entities? And when I say entities, I mean the museums and the galleries. What are the accessibility services currently used by those museums and galleries? Now, when it comes to the conceptual framework that was used, I followed the Russian doll model, which was proposed by Nevesh in 2018. And this is a very interesting model because it looks at events as, well, first of all, it was proposed in relation to considering accessibility as a communication, basically. It's a way of communicating. It's a translation of everyday things, basically. And it looks at an event that is basically contextualized or encased within a multi-layer format, and each event is basically governed by the one before it. So let's say you would like to go to an exhibition, or you would like to go to a museum to learn and to remember. Your experience will depend on all of those layers that come before learning and remembering. You will not possibly be able to get to the venue if you don't know anything about it, if you don't know where it is, if you don't know what is exactly happening. So that would basically fall under the umbrella of marketing and outreach. Now for the methodology, to collect my data, I visited the National Museum of Qatar multiple times. I also looked at the website for an audit. I took notes and photos, which I'm going to show in the following slides. And then I did an analysis of existing documents. In this case, there are the QR codes presently available in the museum. Now we will start with an audit of the of Qatar Museum's main website. When you go on the website, you will find this landing page. And then it's not very clear now, because it's actually not very clear when you look at it on your device. So you will go to the menu section on your top right, and then assuming you would like to learn about accessibility, what are the accessibility services, you will find this bright yellow page. Now, granted, these are the branding guidelines of the museum itself, but it's really not comfortable on the eyes. And then you will have to look at the menu and try to find where accessibility is. Now, when you think of accessibility, you would think that it would come at the top of the menu, given that it starts with the letter A. But that's actually not the case. It comes at the, you can't see it here, but it's right here. That's where accessibility is. So in a way, trying to find information about accessibility on a website is not entirely accessible. And then when you click on this accessibility tab, these are the accessibility services that are provided in each museum and gallery. I'll go over them quickly for the interest of time. Basically in Mathaf, which is the museum in Qatar Foundation, you can see by the definition that they look at accessibility from a physical perspective. They're talking about parking spaces, wheelchairs, and elevator access. And also the cafe and gift shop apparently are wheelchair accessible. I have been there numerous times, and the gift shop is pretty narrow to consider it wheelchair accessible. The fire station, artists and residents, they're very committed to providing all guests with a comfortable and accessible experience. Their accommodation includes accessible toilets, ramps, wheelchairs to borrow, lifts, and sliding doors. So again, accessibility, when they think of it, and it's really interesting because the definition or the strategies are different from one museum to another. Now I'm going to skip all of this for the interest of time because I would like to talk about the fun stuff for this project. Now, very briefly, accessibility on the website, NMOQ's website, again, they have all of these amazing services, but when you look at the grounds or the actual museum, it's not entirely accessible. So I did an audit, and as you can see here, there is a checklist that has a score from 0 to 4, 4 being very accessible and amazing, and 0 being non-existing. You can see here from the parking lot that they do have allocated parking spaces for people with disabilities. The first picture is how you get to the museum, which is through a golf cart. The second one is on the way to the drop-off area, and then the third one is the actual parking space. Now, when it comes to the floor and rest areas, as you can see here, the floor is really not smooth. And I have been there again numerous of times, and I did not fail to trip once. I trip every single time I'm there, although I'm wearing flat shoes, as you can see. And there are definitely also some rest areas, but we can argue that they're not accessible because they are basically in the park itself. So to get there, regardless of your ability, it might be a little bit problematic. When it comes to signage, so you can only find it closer to the museum. So when you get to the parking, you know that you are in the parking of the National Museum of Qatar. However, where to go exactly, it's not very clear until you go, you get closer to the museum. Now, when it comes to the main entrance, as you can see from the first picture on the left, it says the museum entrance, but it's actually not clear. And the entrance itself, because there are so many devices, is also not very, you're not going to have a really smooth entrance to the museum. However, they do have 2-level desks, which is really great. And the rest areas, as you can see from here, they're all exactly the same across the museum. It's very uncomfortable. So sitting there for a few hours will give you last half sentence. Oh my God. Okay, very quickly. Well, I'm going to go through the next few slides. They have a video showing that they do sign language tours, but they actually don't. It's only there for show. The second picture here says that they have a device that deaf people can wear, and it will help them listen to the audio guide, which is a little bit questionable. Definitely deafness is, you know, a spectrum. Some people are hard of hearing, some people can hear. But it's a little bit ambitious to say that deaf people can put on this device and they will be able to hear. And then here there are some audio guides. Now, very quickly, when it comes to the facilities, here I just wanted to document the ground floor restroom. As you can see here, it has the basically the logo of females, and then a person in a wheelchair, and then a mother with a child. However, when it comes to actually opening the door, assuming a mother was pushing or a person was pushing a stroller, it would actually be difficult to get through it because the door is very heavy. And the sink are pretty high, so again, a mother would have to carry her child to have them wash their hands. Okay. So these are basically more pictures that will show you the audit, and as you can see, it's very dark, it's uncomfortable. These pictures were taken at 2 p.m. I'm just going to last slide. So in conclusion, why are we doing this? Because Qatar Museum does actually provide accessibility services. However, when we are on the grounds in the actual museum, it turns out that it's not entirely as accessible as they mention it, or as it says on the website. And the limited accessibility services can actually jeopardize the visitor experience regardless of their abilities. So this is something very important to keep in mind. And conducting such audits is very useful when it comes to knowing how accessible other organizations are. And of course, creative accessibility, which I've mentioned earlier, can be one of the solutions to bridge the gap between the community and the museum. These are my references. Thank you so much for listening. Thank you.
Thank you, Malak. We are being urged to finish early because everybody is hungry outside. Yasmin Al-Ali is exploring the phenomenon of fan subtitling in the Arab world, the case of anime. Yasmin is an MA graduate who is interested in the field of subtitling, especially fan subtitling and animation films in the Arab world. Yasmin, أهلا وسهلا. Can you make your presentation 2 minutes?
I'll give it my best shot. All right. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for sticking around. As Dr. Mahmoud has introduced me, my name is Muhammad Al-Ali. I'm an MA graduate. And today I'm going to be taking you through the research that I conducted during my MA studies, which, as you can see here, exploring the phenomenon of fan subtitling in the Arab world while studying the case of anime. So to jump right in, as we all know, all of us, we consume online content every day through our devices, whether it was our TVs, whether it was our phones, whether it was the signages on the street. Hence, the online content or the audiovisual content that we consume is very vital to our daily lives. And often when we consume this kind of content, it comes from other parts of the world that come in different languages and different dialects and the such. Which is why making this content available for all of us is very, very important, and translation is the key to kind of make that important, whether it was through dubbing or whether it was through subtitling. The field of audiovisual translation is definitely something, a field that's worth studying as an academic domain, because it's something that we feel upon every single day of our lives. And also in the hopes of kind of expanding and exploring the field of AVT in the Arab world, we have a lot more to discover and to explore, which is why what I aim to do in this research is to kind of look at the perception of fan subtitling groups on the subtitles that are being produced in the Arab world, the work dynamic, the audience interaction that they have with their audiences, and the copyrights and ethics. And I know I just sprung up a lot of interesting words there, so this is why I'll be taking it a little step back to kind of define what is fan subtitling. We're all aware of subtitling, as mentioned previously. They're basically subtitles that you tend to see at the bottom of the screen to kind of mediate the content to the viewer. However, fan subtitling is a little bit different because it emerged around the 1980s as a solution to heavily edited and censored content that used to be shown abroad. So basically, what we have here are a set of definitions that kind of created and kind of also evolved with time of the topic. So for example, Diaz Santos and Sanchez, who are pioneers in the field of fan subtitling, defined it as a fan-produced, translated subtitled version of Japanese anime program. While of course all of you are aware, most of you are aware of the Japanese animations that are taking our everyday TV watching by storm. It's basically a Japanese animation that kind of sprang up around the 1960s and really started to flourish internationally around the 1980s. However, because it was being produced and exported to other countries abroad, it used to be heavily edited and censored to make it available for their audiences. However, the watchers were left disappointed, and as such, as a way to amend this, they have created fan subtitling. Perez Gonzalez, also a very important researcher in this domain, has also defined it in a very similar term, newly subtitling-based mediation phenomenon populated by anime fans and hence amateur subtitlers to provide fellow fans with the worldwide content that they desire. However, a decade later, the definition has changed into, by Al-Dalis and Rashid and Adwan, subtitles that are produced by fans or amateur translators of films and TV shows that originate in any country and language other than their own. So the term in itself has broadened in terms of meaning. So it's not only centered on Japan and the Japanese language, now it encases every other language in every other country. However, one denominator that stays constant within this is the fact that the translation itself is done by amateurs, not professionals. In terms of work dynamics, so how do these groups really operate? Diaz Santos and Sanchez, and in addition to Perez Gonzalez, have tried to crack down on this work dynamic, and they were able to find that these were the steps that they were usually taking to kind of create the audiovisual content from A to Z. There might be some minor differences in terms of steps, but usually these are the main kind of processes that used to happen in order to create audiovisual content to the audience. When it comes to copyrights and ethics, as we're all aware, the research that has been done on fan subtitling in general shows that the enforcement of copyright infringement laws are weak. However, it is not weak without a substance, because it genuinely yields efforts and yields monetary gain to the production houses that produce these shows. So it really benefits them to spread the knowledge of these shows and of their existence to many, many audiences over the world, as opposed to having to crack down on them in terms of copyright infringements and limiting their audiences, which is why it's beneficiary basically to everyone, and hence it has stayed as status quo. In addition to the ethics, there is a certain psyche into fan subtitling groups that we find very, very interesting, to kind of have been an effort to create an ethical guide for subtitling, which sounds a little bit odd because usually people associate fan subtitling with pirated works, like infringing the copyright laws. However, it's kind of like, camaraderie against the sideline, basically. So, however, unfortunately, the ethical guide has fallen through, as there has been some sort of differences between the fan subtitling groups. However, they are very, very conscious of their audiences, and they always strive to make the best content for them online. So this has been, in terms of what has been done in the world in general, mainly the Western world in terms of audiovisual content, specifically fan subtitling. However, when we come to the Arab region, Unfortunately, since as this is relatively a newly academic domain that is to take stance in the Arab world, there are papers that are being produced as we speak. However, it is relatively new, therefore, we're still trying to navigate and mediate this content. So as we can see here, Thawabti has discussed subtitling specifically as to the issues that would encounter a fan subtitler in terms of linguistic, in terms of cultural-based or technical. While Izwani here also discussed audiovisual translation in general, kind of making observations on what the online environment and the online cyberspace looks like. There also have been studies to kind of study the tactics or the techniques that the fan subtitling community would take in terms of translating, for example, controversial topics such as, for example, politics, sitcoms, for example. As we can see here, Family Guy was taken as an example since it has those sensitive topics. In terms of copyrights, again, the advancement of copyright infringement laws in the Arab world is very, very weak. And I'm sure some might be here even aware that some countries actually sell pirated content on CDs for very, very cheap prices, as opposed to the content that usually you would find in stores for a very much higher price.
1 minute.
In terms of methodology, so how did I go about doing this? So basically the screenshots and this, I took basic screenshots of the work that was done and the semi-structured interviews with fan subtitling themselves. As it's a very, very close-knit community, it was kind of very, very hard to get in touch with them. And actually this is one of the limitations that I faced, basically finding interviewees, because the nature of the work is quite risky, so opening up to strangers was not the best way to go around it. In addition to time constraints, as this takes a lot of time to kind of analyze and collect data. And also, and again, because I was only able to interview 2 fan subtitling, the results that I have gotten, unfortunately, cannot be said as inclusive of the entire Arabic fan subtitling community, but it kind of gives us a hint as to where we can go. So, what was I able to conclude, basically? So, the current stance of Arab fan subtitling and work dynamics. So, upon the interviews, both of the fan subtitling groups that fan subtitling individuals that I have interviewed, who are also very proactive within the community and are constantly releasing content even as we speak, they believe that the subtitles that we produce in general, for example on TV, for film or for news, are unfortunately not adequate, and they believe that there is much to be desired. They also believe that the qualifications within the fan subtitling people are themselves, they surpass the professional subtitlers and are even more disciplined, and they are not driven by monetary gain because they are doing this out of volunteerism. In addition, there was some sort of competition among different groups. So for example, in terms of quality, I still have time. I'll try to wrap it up. So for example, there's a sense of competition amongst quality, amongst the time, like how fast do you upload it, the quality of the content itself. The work dynamic, in addition, seems to be very, very similar to what we find previously. Again, there were some minor differences here and there to kind of accommodate, for example, time differences. Fan subtitling can work in different time zones, different countries. They are combined together by the online platforms. What I found was very interesting also was apparently they try their absolute best not to censor, as opposed to what we usually see on TV. They try their absolute best to kind of provide the content as it is in accordance to the English, because as it turns out, a lot of them do not have knowledge in the Japanese language, so they don't go accordingly to the English text. So as we can see here, this is an example of trying to stay as faithful to the English text as possible, as it's believed to be the best rendition of the content that is spoken in Japanese. In addition, they try to, it's very, very challenging for them. They try to not censor, but at the same time try to mediate the content to make it closer to their audiences. They also try to domesticate, and this was a term that was actually used by one of the fan subtitlers, which seems to be an interesting fact, because fan subtitlers usually do not have much knowledge on the translation techniques, on how to go about mediating content. So this was a very interesting thing to note. They try their absolute best to interact with their audiences to create a tailored experience. So the online platforms are basically their main gateway into contacting their fans, to kind of getting to know what they're looking into, what kind of topics to stay away from, to kind of mediate the environment, to make sure that it's as inoffensive, however, as authentic and original as possible. So this is another example that was used. As we can see here, the English translation is very direct, and does not aim to kind of censor or change the topic of the magazine that's here. However, it was mediated in the Arabic to kind of create a more generalized approach to kind of make sure it does not offend the audience, who are very generally culture oriented and most of the time also religiously oriented. So in order to also mediate the content for their audiences, we have the concept of headnotes. So subtitles usually appear at the bottom, usually. However, headnotes are a way to kind of mediate the culture, in this case, the Japanese culture, to our Arab audiences, as there are a lot of terms that usually got lost in translation, unfortunately. So the term we have here in the English translation, they do not offer headnotes whatsoever. However, the Arabic one, which is more tailored to the audiences once again, offers translation at the top of the screen to kind of help within the context of the episode and within the context of the conversation to kind of understand what is taking place. Mediating music is also very interesting because usually in English subtitles you would find different variations. Some would mediate the content by providing the lyrics, some would just leave it as is without providing anything. In the Arabic situation here, for the both opening and ending sequence, this is the same show, however, with you can see different graphemes. So they use different font sizes, different colors, different placements. So we have on the left-hand side here, we have the Arabic in the middle. However, we have it here on the right-hand side. So all of these are active choices that are made by the subtitles to kind of make sure that this is the best way to ingest the content without it interfering with the content itself. So at the top here, we also have the Japanese letters themselves. So you have the hiragana and the katakana. And you also have the Romaji, which is the Latin alphabetization of the Japanese language. So it really is an interesting and immersive experience for the watchers. The audience interaction, as mentioned before, basically Facebook, Twitter, any other sort of online part to kind of reach their hands in as much as they can into the community, kind of always be in contact with them, understand what they want. Also, they kind of agreed that the copyright enforcement is very weak, and if anything, they personally believe that they are contributing to the studios, which again is also synonymous with what we have found in the English, in the Western centered research that has been conducted, is that they're also very, very aware that they are creating supply and demand for the studios, and they are aware that these studios are not going after them legally because, again, it's a monetary benefit for everyone, and basically people get their content and the production houses get their monetary gain. However, even though because the official websites that kind of distribute these content, they still have yet to kind of fill their libraries in terms of Arabic content, and these fan subtitlers, we believe that they are giving them the push that they need, even though unfortunately in what people seem do not think as legal means. So kind of to conclude, so basically what I would like to say was a very humble attempt to kind of shed the light at the differences between the fan subtitling in the Arab region and the other regions. As we can see here, they definitely take more in consideration of the culture, the religion, the audiences, the current status quo, what to avoid, what not to avoid, as opposed to these examples that we saw in the English. Unfortunately, they don't offer as much convenience as possible. The fan subtitlers are very, very proactive in their approach to their audiences, in their approach to kind of seeing what are the new shows, what are the things that people are interested in. In addition, while conducting all of this research, very, very interestingly, what I would invite future researchers to look into, for example, different fandoms and different behaviorisms. So for example, you have fan subtitling acting as a group, while other people have it as a one-man show, doing all these steps from A to Z single-handedly. Also maybe conducting surveys as to people who would like to receive the content as the dubbed means or subtitled means, as a lot of us have ingested this kind of content as youngsters through Space Tune, which I'm sure the cinema is with a lot of people.
Sentence.
Yep. And so this content really has a lot of potential to kind of spread out and really look into our environmental cyberspace and what really can be done and the changes that happen as technology evolves as well. And thank you very much.
Thank you. Well, thank you all for being patient with us from the beginning. Unfortunately, we don't have time for question and answer, but the speakers are open for discussion and questioning over the lunch. Thank you. Enjoy. يعطيكم العافية. معلش ضغطت عليك أنا لأنه هم بيضغطوا ما بيرسلوا رسائل.